I think that's a good time to ask you what your number 6 was.
My number 6 was actually going to be Starbound, just because they finally finished it, or got it into the launch stage at least. So they finally got the campaign into it. The co-op is so much easier now to just jump into, and there's no more port mapping or any of that annoyance. You could just invite a friend to your game, and boom, they come right into your world, and you get to start playing again. I think there's like a home building mechanic now to it. Honestly, it's one of those games that I've been waiting for so long to finally get finished, and now that it is, I'm happy. I'm happy to report that it was totally worth it. It's kind of like one of those Grim Dawn cases where you wait on a game and you're like, man, I can see a ton of potential here, but I'm like, I don't want to really burn out on playing the incomplete version of this concept. And so you want to hold off until the final finished version, and you can hopefully say that your money was worth it. And the good thing is I can say that yes, my $15 that I threw behind this project definitely paid off in the end, because Starbound is a great 2D survival game. If you have people to play it with, it's an easy recommendation for me at $20. The work that those guys put into that game speaks for itself.
I have definitely been looking forward to that game being finished as well, and I haven't really made the time to go back and play through it in its 1.0 state, but I've heard that there's an introductory section now, that it's a lot more of a sort of guided, propulsive introductory experience, which is definitely something that I was looking forward to, because the way it was in the earlier development phases with that game where you just kind of get dropped in was a little bit jarring to me. So I'm really looking forward to jumping in and experiencing the beginning stages of that game as they were intended to be. Having said all that, why don't you go ahead and take us to our next destination?
Well, since that death room was... Oh. Hello. Yep, this room is safe.
Alright, it looks like we have a special friend here who's clearly gone insane, but we'll, deal with that later. So this is a room that has 3 traps around it. We know one of them for sure. Actually, so we know that all of these other rooms are traps based on what we know here. I actually think for my pick, I may take us in a different direction, but for the time being, let me ponder that and we will continue with the list. For me, my number 5 game is actually a very recent game that I actually have only maybe spent about 4 or 5 hours playing so far, but it's one of those games that really captivated me right off the bat. It's also kind of a unique, kind of special thing, because I typically don't make a lot of time to play single player games for various reasons, mostly because I don't have a ton of time, a ton of free time is a general rule, and when I do play games, I generally like to concentrate on cooperative experiences, things that have a social element to it, or where I can spend time with Max here or other people that I typically play games with. And so for me to make the time to play a single player game is kind of a big deal. There have certainly been single player games over the past few years, things like Metal Gear Solid 5 and Rogue State from last year, or even going back to the previous year, things like This War of Mine, which is still one of my all-time favorite games, that have really just been so great and so well done that I felt like it was completely justified to spend the time playing them. For me, I feel like one of those games this year is going to be This Is the Police, which is sort of a management sim combined with a choose your own adventure narrative that's done in sort of like a comic book art style, where you basically play as a somewhat corrupt police chief who is 180 days from retirement, and each day of that path is represented as a different chunk of gameplay, where you basically control the actions of all the different officers and detectives of the police force, decide whether or not you're going to participate in any illegal activities to sort of pad your retirement fund, and kind of ride this very delicate line between your sort of duty as a chief of police and to your fellow officers versus the whims and wants of City Hall versus the various crime families and organized crime that's happening in the city that you're in. And I think the thing that's kind of special about this game is the dynamic of how the story and the gameplay and the presentation of it and everything just kind of weaves into this very compelling, very complete feeling package that really just grabbed me right from the first time I saw it and just hasn't let go. It's just one of those games that when I'm not playing it, I'm thinking about it, and I think that's always a good sign.
Honestly, that was a game that even the first day that I saw it come out really caught my eye. I still plan on picking that up at some point because I definitely want to try it out and see for myself.
So what was your number 5?
So my number 5 was a game that we've been playing quite a bit of, and that would be the Ghost in the Shell standalone complex free-to-play first-person shooter.
Nice.
And you know we've been looking for one of these for a while, so when we finally did find one that we could both agree on that is legit, it would definitely make this list. And I think that game, I didn't really understand how to play it at first, and I think that's what is so deceiving about that game. There's a certain degree of confidence, maybe that's the best word for it, that you go into when you're first-person shooter fan, like me, or like us, I should say. For the most part, first-person shooters are pretty straightforward. There's just a certain degree of familiarity that you're basically going to go in and expect from it. And so when I didn't get what I expected, I was kind of off-put by it. But the more and more that I kept playing it, the more and more I understood what the game was actually about. Utilizing the abilities of all the different characters in the game, figuring out which types of guns that you wanted to use in order to fit that playstyle that you use in a first-person shooter. That game has a lot going on for it, especially for a free-to-play game. It's been the most fun I've had with a free-to-play shooter since Soldier Front 2, and that is no sly compliment there. That is a pretty tall order that I just laid out there, because I loved Soldier Front 2, and I still miss it to this day. I feel like Ghost in the Shell standalone complex is definitely making up for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a game for me that is just so welcome. You kind of touched on it before, that like we've been looking for so long for a game like that, a game that's competitive, first person shooter, kind of team-based feel, where you can party up with your buddies, play on the same team together, where it's got a wide variety of weapons and attachments and gizmos and gadgets and things to mix up the gameplay. One of the things that's surprising to me about that game, and I think it's kind of double-edged, like you said, is that it's not quite exactly what you would expect. On some levels, that game is very predictable and very rote and exactly what you would anticipate from a team-based first-person shooter. But in some respects, in some very critical and subtle respects, there's these little wrinkles and these little nuances to the way that game functions that, like you said, might be initially off-putting, but then once you kind of wrap your head around them, you really get to appreciate what they bring to that formula and how they make that game feel a little bit more special, or just that little bit different.